Why the focus on behaviors? Why the focus on behaviors?
Yes, because thanks for having me on, and welcome everyone. I want to share a story first before I get into the whys and the whats and the hows and everything. But when I left school and I started my first job, I went into an environment within an organization, and from the time I entered, it is what seemed what we call a toxic environment. Everybody shouting at each other, and it was not the right place to be. Behaviors create culture, and it is what the culture was at the time in that environment. Now, I stayed there maybe for a year and a half, which in my opinion was a little too long, but I decided that it was time to leave before my losing my control and everything else became a habit. So it was time to go. Behaviors create a competitive advantage. They have a part to play in productivity and everything that we do within the environment. But behaviors create something that is observable from maybe values. When organizations say they have values and organizational values, behaviors change that into something that is observable and measurable. But where do behaviors come from? I mean, if I had to ask you a question, where was the first time that you experienced an environment? And the reason I'm asking this is because in 1936, psychologist Kurt Lewin came up with a formula. He was the one who came up with a lot of the leadership styles that we know today. Behavior is a function of a person in an environment. So when was the first time that we experienced an environment? It was in the womb. When we were in the womb, we experienced an environment. That has something to do with our behavior. That is why it's such a challenge, because look at where it starts. When we were born, we have parents who created an environment as well. When we went to school, our teachers created an environment that made us feel a certain way in the classroom. And that sort of dictated our behavior in the classroom. And now in organizations, we go into organizations and we experience an environment. And that sort of dictates a behavior. So culture, yes, behaviors create culture, but culture also has an influence on our behavior. So that is something that we always have to look at. First, as to begin, in terms of why the focus on behavior. It's very, very important.
Definitely, Tony, it's just triggering something in my mind, what you said here, that cultures can determine your behavior. So probably what I may be in one environment and the culture may determine how I behave, whereas in another environment, I may behave differently. I'm getting that from your conversation, right? That cultures can determine behaviors.
And that is normal. And some people are affected more than others.
Yes. But then, that's not always the best thing, right? And that's what you talk about, the toxic culture.
Yes.
So would you say that values, we keep hearing the word values, beliefs, our attitudes are important as well? What do you think?
Yeah, the values they're the root of behaviors. Values, belief, attitudes, all of those things are the root of what you actually see. But the reason we want to focus on behaviors is because behaviors is the only thing that you could actually observe. You cannot observe a value. You cannot observe. If I had to look at somebody and you ask me, well, what is his or her value or attitude towards something, I could only tell that if they behave in certain ways. Now,
right.
Caveat to that is that attitudes and behaviors don't always match. Peer pressure is like that. You ever heard the saying, have one more drink, man. You can't stand up on one foot. But somebody might not want the second drink, and they might do it just to, be a part of friends and peer pressure, especially with teens. That happens a lot, and you see that. So beliefs, attitudes, and values are important also, but we have to focus on the actual behaviors if we want to focus on something that we could observe. A belief.
What you're saying then, Tony, is that the behaviors are observable, but the values and your beliefs are not observable.
Yes, not unless they come out as a behavior. So a belief will develop into a value when the person's commitment to it grows and they see something as being important.
Get you. So what is the first thing we should do about them then?
Well, it's not an easy fix. If it was an easy fix, everybody will be doing it, and everybody will have the behaviors that they want. The first thing we have to do in any organization is to define the behaviors that you want. A lot of companies have competencies. They might call it values, and some might call it behaviors. They mean sort of on paper the same thing, but they're not really the same thing. A competency is sort of a mixture of the functional component of a job, what you do, what the skills and knowledge and abilities you have, but it is also the how you are doing it, because there are many people with skills and knowledge that they don't do what they're supposed to do anyway. They might be coming to work late every day, but they're very skilled. So we have to focus on the behaviors. And this is not when I say define the behaviors, I don't mean a literal definition of it. Define how that behavior will look at your organization. For example, if I say initiative, and initiative is a popular one that people use and they like to use for their competency framework, something that they have. You're not supposed to put a dictionary definition of what initiative is there. You're supposed to put what in the behavior you will have the competency, but then you also have the behavior. If I put initiative as the competency, the behavior is what does that person have to be doing in order for me to say that person is showing initiative. There might be a specific behavior that company or department is looking for with that behavior, the initiative.
So would you say then the initiative is the behavior? Initiative is the behavior?
Yes.
And then what do we need then to show initiative? Yeah, that's what you need.
Yes, exactly. What is that looking like in that organization? What does the initiative look like? So people might call it a value, they might call it a competency, but we are looking at initiative as the word that they have to represent. So some companies will have 5 or 6 core competencies or competencies that they will look for. I've seen some people have 15, which should be out of the question. You can't manage people. You can only manage people up to a certain point.
So then, like let's say I want in my organization for people to take initiative, right? So how would I say that persons are really taking initiative? I may define it by saying that if in facilities management, for example, they know that, okay, as a custodian, we do not have enough cleaning supplies. So let me go quickly and probably communicate it to the manager or to the storekeeper.
Right. So that is an example of initiative for that.
Right. But that was defined, and then we can determine, hey, really then Tony is showing initiative.
Yes, exactly.
Because, I like what you're saying, Tony, because many times in organizations, we keep hearing, well, Tony not taking initiative, Shivani not taking initiative. But what is initiative? People may not even know what the meaning is.
Yeah, and that is one thing we will talk about later on, is people have to know what that looks like in action.
Yes.
Everything. So you could go, for example, to 2 different hotels. And they might say the same thing in terms of their organizational values. Both might say they have a customer service mentality. But what does that mean? That might be a value. And that is the difference between competencies and values. A competency is always observable. A value is not always observable or tangible. So what are the behaviors that we need to look for to make sure that could happen? That customer service, professionalism, or whatever it is.
And I've also found too and I'm seeing persons in the audience here who come from a lot of technical fields, but it's in project management, facilities engineering, etc. And they like you will understand that especially in these technical fields, we have to define the behaviors, because we may say initiative in one environment is totally different from another environment. So it got to be defined.
Exactly. I have seen, so what companies do sometimes is they have, the old way is to have different competencies for different departments, and people still use that to a certain extent. And I'm not going to say it doesn't work. It works if you really in touch with it. But companies have also taken, say, 5 core competencies and made that the culture of the organization. So every department will have to demonstrate these behaviors. But in a sales department, for example, initiative will look a different way to the accounts department. in terms of what that person has to do for me to say that they are showing initiative.
But Tony, I think that is a downfall in a lot of organizations.
Yes.
It's too generic. It is too generic. And then if I am running an FM or you're running your sales department, initiative is different from you and me. So it's just, we could already see some of the issues that are being faced when you don't practice it in the correct way.
Yes, exactly.
Already, I'm learning a lot. I could contribute with you. You are helping me to contribute in the conversation. But let me also, ask this other question. Don't companies, I think we can get into it already, but don't companies have performance assessment? Because I'm thinking about mine, performance assessments.
Yeah, a lot of them do. But I've been to companies where sometimes they treat it like an ornament. It's there on the shelf and you pull it out at the end of the year and you do it, and the employees don't respect it just as much as the leader doesn't. Not every leader is going to pay attention to it, and some people do. Some people really pay attention to it, and they have quarterly assessments, which is the right way to do it, so that you give people the feedback, and I guess you know exactly what you have to develop that person into if they are reporting to you. Now, not every leader believes in this, and I don't want to paint this like it's some fairy tale. I want to. There's a theory in management called the theory of X and Y, and theory X is leaders think that people only are motivated by money, and that is all. It's just rewards and punishment. But if you treat everybody like that, people are going to get demotivated, because not everybody. Some people actually love their job, and if you treat them like that, they will get demotivated to a certain extent. And of course, theory Y is something that is almost opposite. So individuals are highly self-motivated, and you could leave them on their own, and you could coach and give feedback, and it's sort of evolutionary change. Like you sort of develop employees over a period of time. Now, the perfect, I guess there's no perfect brand of leadership, but every situation demands a different sort of environment that you are bringing.
Adaptive leadership. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it should adapt to the situation. Yes, adapt to those people who just in it for the low level of on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The people who are just there to pay for food and clothing and that type of thing. And maybe that is all they want. But for some people, they really want to improve. They really want to develop their skills, and they really want to develop the relationships in the environment. And that you have to have the actual conversations for that to happen.
Very true. It makes me think a lot in terms of organizations that I've been a part of and teams that I've been a part of, not understanding the behaviors and how it really contributes to a lot of issues, a lot of problems, and when not managed properly. So, let's say, so you give us one example, which was the initiative as being the behavior, and, that we have to define it. And of course, we'll learn more about that. But my question is, after you have defined that behavior, how do you manage it? Because to me, that's really important. I could do very good documentation. A lot of persons in the audience will know what I'm speaking about from a PM point. You document, and you have all your documentation. And if you don't manage it, you are failure.
Yes. So the second thing, the first one is defining the actual behavior, so people know what they are supposed to be doing. Okay, that is important. But the second one is really having the conversations. And there are a lot of different types of conversations that people have to have. When you define the behaviors, the first conversation, and many people leave this out, is the expectation conversation at the beginning of the financial year. And that expectation is not only about what goals you have to achieve. You could tell people how many goals you have to achieve, but you have to be clear on what are the behaviors that are going to drive those goals. Remember, it's all about the people, and people talk about SMART goals all the time, and they have these words that represent each letter there. But the SMART is really specific, measurable, and people say achievable for the A, but it really should be agreed upon. Agreed upon. And then realistic and time bound. Because once you agree to your goals, just think about it. If I was giving you goals and you had to achieve it, wouldn't it make sense to you, and wouldn't you be more motivated if we had a conversation about it and we agreed that this is what we need to achieve and how we're supposed to behave, rather than telling you, look, I need you to sell $1 million, go do it. there's no agreement there, and people are not motivated in that type of environment. Now, I know it is not always possible to do that, because some people work for multinationals, and sometimes you just have goals set down and they have to achieve. But this is something important to remember.
No, I totally agree what you're saying. If people understand and just having a conversation with the individual and they agree to it, you have to agree to something, because I can be working with you, Tony, and you are my supervisor or my manager, and I didn't agree to it, or if I don't understand it, then this is not going to get done. So agreed upon is and agreed upon will get buy-in to the thing, if
Yes.
you will buy into the concept. If you don't agree to it, you're going to have difficulty in buying to it. You're talking to me, and I'm seeing three persons in my mind, right? That we need to do this work with by me. I'm just seeing it in organizations that I've been a part of. And I guess too is more the coaching that we keep speaking about, Tony.
Well,
the coaching aspect.
That is another conversation. There are a series of conversations that leaders need to have with their people. Mm-hmm. So the expectations conversations is one. The performance conversations every quarter, if you're doing a mini assessment every quarter, and to let people know how they are performing and moving forward. And sometimes, we could talk about different conversations, and I could say, when was the last time that you went to your employees and find out how they're actually doing? Like
how they're actually doing
the job, like how they're doing, how's life generally? I mean, you have to remember that what you are doing with your direct reports is trying to improve relationships. And I know that is not possible with every single person, mm-hmm. but think about what will happen if you didn't have the conversations. If you didn't have the conversations, why do relationships fall apart? Any kind of relationship. It's because we don't have the conversations that we need to have. What about the conversation of how am I doing as a leader? When last did you get that type of feedback? That is important to have. And of course, the coaching conversations that you mentioned. Now, there's a model for coaching that we do in training that every leader needs to have. And some leaders may
not have it. Yeah, may not have it.
They may not have it, but some people need a longer coaching session depending on the issue they might be having. And then feedback. How do we give feedback? How do we give positive and negative feedback? I call it a conversation, even though most of the time is one way. Is the leader telling the employee what they did right, what they did wrong. But that turns into a conversation as well. And it could turn into a coachable moment as well.
Yes.
Within the conversations.
So this is something that we have to do a lot more in our conversations. Firstly, so let me just get our key takeaways up to this point then, Tony. What I'm getting for the conversation would be, do we understand behaviors? Do people really understand what... And we keep hearing the word behavior. You have the wrong behavior, then you don't have the right behavior, you have the wrong behavior. But when I hear people speak like that, Tony, you know what I think? Do you define those? Do people really understand the behaviors? I can tell you in my organization, until we really sit down and do this, people don't understand the behaviors. And they will keep talking all the time. Well, we don't know, and all these things, but it is not defined. It's really not defined. This is a living thing for me, and a lot of the audience,
Yeah, it's very generic what people have sometimes on their performance assessment.
And it's a generic performance assessment. And this is a conversation that I was having with you before, earlier, where especially in the technical fields, we have to define the behaviors properly. In just going a little more in terms of the project management point, and I was discussing it with the marketing consultant Renata this morning. Actually, we were talking so much about PM, project management, and how PM, we don't have these things documented. You don't understand some of the behaviors that are necessary. And the coaching aspect also comes into play. So the other point is, do you define the behaviors? Do people really understand? Are the behaviors observable? Do you know do we sit as leaders and do we do that? And how will the conversation, do you have the conversation with your people? Some of us may dread that conversation, Tony. You're dreading it. Why? Why are you dreading it?
Yeah, because and I've been to one company where they have something called a coaching session, but it's not a coaching session. What it is for employees to come and they speak to them in sort of something that doesn't motivate them. Then, it's not a coaching session at all. Coaching is something very, very specific. It's a lot about questioning, and feedback is the opposite of that. It's more about telling people how they are doing, what they are doing right, what they are doing wrong. But the reason for all the conversations, and leaders, not all leaders will agree on this. There are leaders, again, we go to the theory X and Y, leaders who think that, yeah, you need to get it done, just get it done. Let's not deal with anything else. Just get the work done. That is all. There's no relationship, but there's always a task focus and relationship focus that should be there if you want to maximize the level of, it's not only the nature of the relationship that you have, it's the level of psychological safety and the unconscious bias that exists in our organizations. And psychological safety is very, very important as well. So apart from all the conversations, which is really communicating that is the second point to support the definition of the behaviors. The conversations will create that environment that will allow the relationships to grow and allow people themselves to feel a higher level of psychological safety within the environment. Because remember that what that creates is trust. And if for anybody, and there might be leaders listening in here, if you ever heard about that book by Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, the very first dysfunction is a lack of trust. Mm-hmm. And that lack of trust is created by a lack of vulnerability. It's created, by invulnerability, which is the same thing. And what that means is when that happens, there is a inattention, so there's a avoidance of conflict. So you might be in a meeting, and if there is no psychological safety, or the employee is not feeling psychologically safe to say something, they wouldn't say anything. And then leaders leave the meeting saying, well, nobody said anything, everybody agreed. And there's an artificial harmony that is created within the environment. So leaders themselves, through the conversations, through the development of relationships, they have to create that environment, because psychological safety is not the same thing as trust. It's making people feel comfortable in that environment. Is making them feel comfortable to say something even if they disagreed. And the leaders themselves have to have that vulnerability to know, well, I am not always right all the time. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in dictatorships, you find that is impossible.
But I think, Tony, yes, I agree with what you're saying, that, we need to have this trust and where an employee could come to us and tell us, hey, I don't believe in what you're saying, things like that. But this could only work if you know the correct behaviors and, you have your whole structure in place. If not, this is just going to be chaotic. This is going to be chaotic. People are going to come telling you, well, I don't believe in what you're saying, I don't believe in this. But you must have a structure, and this is where you're talking about having the behaviors and having the conversations.
Well, everything is about structure. So we have defining the behaviors and then supporting them. So define and support. And support is really the conversations that I just mentioned. And there's a how-to to all of them. And it's a loaded topic, a very, very loaded topic. And
we could talk for hours upon that, and I know that's what you're going to discuss with us in our upcoming workshops. So how will conversations change behaviors then, Tony? How will conversations change behaviors? Have you seen that it change behaviors?
Well, like I mentioned before, let's look at what will happen if you don't have the conversations. You remember, behaviors start from very early on, and we have to create the environment that would dictate the right behaviors, and creating that environment comes from many, many different things. And if we, for the people who are listening, there's a motivational, I wouldn't go into very technical, I wouldn't get very technical here, but there's the Herzberg 2-factor model.
Herzberg, mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are motivators and then hygiene factors, which are the satisfiers. So one of the hygiene factors, they don't really motivate, but people get demotivated when they're not there, like compensation and making sure that the leadership quality is there. But then the motivators could add to that. When the motivators are there, great. But all of the conversations create that leadership quality is what leaders do to make sure that the environment is the right one. And again, that builds the psychological safety that we need on the team.
So Definitely, conversations can change behavior. Conversations can change behavior.
Yes.
But something that was just a conversation I was having, right? And in an organization, and what one of the executives was telling me, actually, she said, Shivani, I'm not about with people anymore and changing the behavior of people, because it's time, it's sort of past that, and we just need to implement a structure. And if people fall into it, well, they fall, meaning we find a place for them. But what do you think about that? What are your views on that in terms
Well,
of?
remember, you're trying to create a culture. If you let's go back to defining the behaviors. If you have defined the behaviors that you actually want, then if you have to bring people in, you know exactly what to look for.
Right.
You know exactly. So, for example, I am punctual by nature. That is one of my good qualities. Okay. If I was working for you, you will have no work to do with my level of punctuality or giving you things on time. You might have work to do elsewhere, but not on the punctuality. Behavior is a choice, and if people have to force your choice to make the right behavior, if people have to use the rewards and punishment to get your behavior, if you are that type of person, then that system has to be in place. Think about what happens, and I know we talked about. Do you remember when the seatbelt law came out in Trinidad? The seatbelt law, I think it was always there. The law was always there, but it was never really enforced.
Yeah.
It was never really enforced to any great extent. It's only when they started charging people $1,000 and they started wearing their seatbelt. I mean, even me, I said, I'm going to put on the seatbelt. But now, today, after years of wearing my seatbelt, the first thing I do when I jump in my car is I put on my seatbelt because it has become a habit.
Yes.
So when you get people to display certain behaviors consistently, then you get people developing habits, and that is what creates the culture. Because people are not going to drive on the shoulder in Miami when they rent a car if they're doing it in Trinidad, because there's an environment there that sort of tells them, well, I can't do it here because I might get charged. I have a better chance of getting charged.
So create the environment first, what you want, and then you look at the behavior. So it's coming back to the conversation over and over. Do you know your behaviors? What are the behaviors that you want? What are the behaviors? What about you mentioned the term unconscious bias. Unconscious bias. What is this unconscious bias?
Yeah, it's really something that we all suffer from. It's something that we are all guilty. We are all guilty. It's also called implicit bias, but they are learned attitudes and stereotypes that we might have against people or groups that exist in our subconscious mind. It could involuntarily affect the way we act and think. So, some years ago, I had I used to go to this when I just moved up to where I live. There was this plumber I used to go to, but I sort of had he was very, very aggressive. And I always had, growing up, I always had a problem with that. Very aggressive people. I used to avoid them all the time. And it was an unconscious avoiding that I was doing. But eventually it turned into conscious, like I was consciously avoiding them after a while. But sometimes we don't realize, even the person who was being aggressive, after years, I got to know him well, and I realized that he didn't even realize how he was coming across to people. So sometimes we have this bias that we have in our minds, that this is the way we have to be, and our passion is not a thinking animal. So sometimes we act in ways that maybe comes across as, and there are many types of unconscious bias. I mean, affinity bias and bias against race, against gender, and a lot of it is unconscious. But is to be more objective in the workplace and ask the questions about people, about situations, about groups, so that you could make the right decisions in the end.
Yeah, this unconscious bias can really throw things off so much, and we have to understand that as managers, as leaders, huh?
Yes.
And if you don't, we will make terrible decisions.
Yes,
decisions. The thing is, we have employees. So if you have employees, then Tony, and they don't demonstrate the right behaviors after you do all of this thing, what do you do?
Yeah, and that is exactly what we have to do, is put the environment, create the right environment for those people. So it comes back to some people you have to use rewards and punishment with, but other people we have to spend the time to develop the relationship. We have to spend the time to develop relationships with everybody, but it is not going to work for everybody. So we have to put the rewards in place. We have to make sure that the satisfiers are there, because without the satisfiers, people get demotivated. But the other side of it is that for the people who want to learn, you have to coach, you have to have the conversations, but understand where you are going with it. Understand exactly where we are going with it. There are two types of change. There's evolutionary change and there's revolutionary change. So evolutionary change takes time. It takes time for you to develop relationships with people and to have these conversations. And people sometimes, they say they have no time for this and they have no time. Well, if you have no time for it, more of your time is going to be wasted down the line, because you're going to have to do something else eventually. And you may lose people and have to replace people and all of those types of things.
So what you're saying then, Tony, build the relationship, work on it.
Yeah. And you can't do it with everybody. I don't want to, again, I'm not turning into this to any kind of fairy tale. Managing behaviors are very, very, this is a very difficult skill for leaders.
Yes, I will definitely agree with you, Tony.
But they have to spend the time.
Yeah, because in different environments, and I would say, okay, so sorry everybody, if anybody would like to type any questions, please type it in the chat and we definitely would take it. And what I was saying, Tony, in terms of some of the teams that I have managed over the years, some of the technical teams, something you said here just triggered, many things you're saying triggering conversations here to have with you further. But some persons, you know, they like to be dictated to, you know, that's their way. They like to say, okay, Tony, go and change this ball. And that's what they can't take initiative then. You know, one might say, but that's not taking initiative.
Right. So once you know that you have to develop initiative in somebody, then you take the necessary steps to do that. You coach, you give feedback, and hopefully a year from now, the level of initiative would have moved from here to here. But that is what you want to see. But you are not going to get them improving if you are going to tell them what to do. Any leader.
See what you just said, Tony? What to do. I am in 100% agreement with you. I have seen it. If you want to talk to anybody who see it live and direct, is me, right? In terms of persons will tell these persons, I'm talking about different levels, right? Some low-level staff and, you know, low-level employees then. Persons may tell them, they don't know better. But you know who I blame? I don't blame them, you know. I blame us as the managers. We have to create, you firstly have to know what are the behaviors, and then you have to identify they don't have it, and what do you do to get them? And this is why you're talking about your whole coaching thing. It is a very difficult thing.
Evolutionary change. Mm-hmm. Coaching is evolutionary change. But sometimes coming back to the revolutionary or disruptive change, sometimes you have to be stern with people and let them know, if this doesn't happen, you don't get this. Mm-hmm. You know, even bandits will stop at a traffic light. You know, there's a system in place to help people to behave. If people know that they will get away with everything, well, then they will take action. And I've seen many times I've seen that happen. Where and you don't have to be, if you are being like that with everybody in the company, well, something wrong with the entire company.
If you are, I didn't hear you. I didn't hear that.
If you have to be disruptive with everybody and threaten everybody, well, then that is a serious problem. Mm-hmm. Because it means that you don't have defined behaviors, you haven't had the conversations, you haven't been developing people and.
But sometimes, so I'm comparing it to many different teams, right? So definitely, some persons in other environments that I'm a part of, I don't have to do no conversation like this, right? At the end of the day, people know what they have to do, and they will call me up and say, Shivani, but hey, something wrong with the Zoom link here. We have to get this, we have to get that, right? I don't even have to bother, because it's great.
Yeah.
So different environments, and I guess it's a people thing too. The individual is with the individual. It's the individual.
Yes, for sure.
But as you correctly said, we have to know what we want and then develop it if it is lacking. Some people, it may not be lacking. The initiative, if you are saying that it's a behavior and they have it, it's part of them. They want to see the end result. And there are some people just don't want it.
I think what is important both for leaders and their direct reports is to have a level of self-awareness. Even as leaders, we have to know what we have to work on. And for the direct reports, we have to help them along the same way. Some people may be already aware of it, but we have to, it's something that we have to have the conversations about. What are they aware of if they need development in initiative or adaptability or adapting to situations, adapting to people, and what about mental issues that happen in this COVID time of COVID? Now what happens now? You have a situation now where leaders are having trouble because they can't see, they can't observe the behaviors because people are working from home. So things have to change. Thank you so much,
David. I like that, Tony. That they can't see, they're working from home. This whole thing, change it up. I have seen somebody, David, is typing a question here. How are job requirements like during the pandemic? Our job requirements.
What was the question?
Job requirements. What are they like during the pandemic? Job requirements. I guess he's asking if it's changing the requirements for certain positions. And I would say yes.
Yeah, it is changing, but the expectations will change as well. I mean, what do people, of course, if you know you're hiring somebody who's going to be working from home, then specific behaviors are going to have to be defined for that sort of situation. A lot of things have changed, not only expectations, goals may have changed. What are people like when they can't interact with their colleagues? Do they have to change how they talk or how often they talk to each other? Requirements might change in terms of skills. You may have to have certain level of skills in terms of the virtual world in order to function in that environment. But that depends on the environment. Many people have gone back to work, but many people are still away from the office.
And you mentioned this working from home. This is creating an entire new type of behavior too. What the behavior for that? How are you going to be working in that type of environment now?
Well, I think the focus is now shifting to results. So if I am working from home and my manager can't see my behavior, so he can't, but he could certainly see if I'm on time with things. If I'm delivering on time, he could certainly see that. So the focus has to move to results. But let's suppose you are having online meetings and you observe that I'm just using this as an example. You observe that maybe people are not contributing in the meeting. That is a behavior that might need to be measured more on a key performance indicator side, or on a behavior side as well. I want to, if you had to give feedback on that, I want to see you contributing more in the at least 50% more, or at least one contribution for every topic that something like that. I mean, define it how you want to define it, but you have to focus on what you could actually observe in a meeting and the results that the person is actually getting. I don't want to sugarcoat it. When people are working at home, it is not an 8 to 4 situation.
Yes.
People have children online.
Yes.
They have chores that they have to do. They have to schedule certain things. And leaders shouldn't expect that either. They should expect the job to get done, but it will get done according to deadlines. Not
exactly
an 8 to 4 situation where people are sitting at the desk waiting or sitting on the phone waiting for you to call. Because I have come across one or two. What's the word? They're not comfortable then with their employees at home and not seeing them and that type of thing.
Yes, yeah. They want to see them. So yeah. I get that. I hear that a lot in different environments. They say, but Shivani, that's the reason why the organization is failing, because people not coming out to work. And I tell them, I say, you know what, this is an entire mindset. This is an entire shift in organizations, and we need to put a proper system in place. If it's not, then we're going to have issues. So yeah. What you said,
the hybrid environment is here to stay.
You agree? What you said, Tony?
The hybrid environment, whether people are working at home for a little while, at work for a little while, or either or, it's a hybrid environment. So you as an employee, you have to deal with colleagues and leaders or bosses who you cannot see every day of the week. but don't delay the conversations for when you see them. Have the conversations online. Don't avoid the virtual meetings. They have to happen. They are here to stay. Whether we like it or not, they are here to stay.
So many different points coming out from this, and understanding their hybrid environment, understanding, hey, you could still have the conversation online. Look, we're having a conversation online. We could do I have done performance assessment online. I did about 20 online within the last week, and it works well. It works well. You just have to have your system in place. Of course, it's a different story with the performance appraisal. We need to redesign that properly from what you're saying.
Well, a lot of people do. And it's not that they have a bad performance appraisal. They may just have to adjust it slightly in terms of what they are putting in now, the key performance indicators are usually very well done because a lot of people focus on goals.
Yes.
In fact, some leaders, that's their only focus, on goals, and not spending the time to develop the relationships with their people. And the autocratic leaders tend to be like that. They are not, but you can't be autocratic all the time with everyone. It is going to cause some issues with motivation and that type of thing going forward. So the best leaders are leaders who can adapt to different types of situations and different types of people.
And we see that is so necessary now. If you can't, we love to say you got to be agile. You got to be agile, otherwise this is not going to work.
Yes.
So great. And we have another question from the audience again. Vishal, a familiar name. Good night. I know you have mentioned about initiatives. In my situation, the company I work for, they have a union, and most of the time the employee will only stick to their functions dictated in their job description. As a result, the employees don't take the initiative to go beyond their functions. How do I fix that?
Yeah, well, once you mention union, that is a whole can of worms that you're going to open there. But with the hiring process, when we have to hire people, we have to hire people who already have that initiative, and there's an interview process for that as well. But that is not the case here. The case here is you have situations where people are only working according to their job description, but that is where the behaviors come from.
Exactly.
So on the job description itself, there should be something in there that supports what
behaviors.
That means to some extent. This is what I talked about at the beginning, when we define behaviors. All of these defined behaviors, to some extent, come from the job descriptions. And for a lot of people, sometimes they have to adjust what is on the job description. And as leaders, we have to have the conversation with our direct reports at the beginning of the financial year. This is what initiative actually means. And
I totally get what you're saying, Tony, and I totally get Vishal what he is saying also. And it's not there. It's not there. And if it is not there, it comes back to what you are teaching us here this afternoon, Tony. You got to define it. It has to be a process. It has to be a process.
The key performance indicators could support you as well. If you can measure something that the person, like something that is actually measurable, that somebody that you could put in a key performance indicator that shows that they are going the extra mile for the, I don't know what type of situation it is, but for the customer or to get a task done or anything like that. Because some people, maybe they hate their job, and that is the reality. And they only want to come to work, do what they have to do, and get out. But and for anybody on listening here, sometimes when you have a good relationship with colleagues at work, you get them to do things that they may not necessarily do, and that's one side of it.
Tony, what you just said there, and everything you are telling us here this afternoon is about people and developing your relationship with them. I felt so happy with a member of my team. He was so angry, with the organizations saying, Shivani, the organization, he's so fed up. And when I asked him to do something, right? And he said, Shivani, I am not doing it for the organization. I'm doing it for you. And you wouldn't believe, Tony, how happy I felt. Well, you will believe how happy I felt because, I mean, you come from this type of environment. It showed me that I built a little trust with the individual, and, you say he's doing it for me. And I felt very, 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 very happy. I said, no matter what, I said, I reach in somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And
so
that happens a lot of the times.
And that's to me how you can get people to do things in the organization and to show initiative, which is probably beyond your job description. But it does come down to what you are telling us here this afternoon. Do you know it? And I can tell you too, in my organizations and different things, I don't know it. People don't know it. We have not done this. And this, to me, it is so very, very, very important. I'm enjoying this talk with you, Tony. What about these factors? So as people, if anybody got any more questions, please feel free to type it in the chat. What about the factors for getting this done? What are the factors? Talking about factors and the behaviors. Tell us about the factors here.
Well, I mean, the topic here is the three factors that will drive the behavior. So the first one we talked about is define, then to adapt through conversations, and the last one is not adapt, but connect. You have the conversations. The third one is to adapt. So now you have to, with defining the behaviors and having the conversations, we now have to adapt. How often and how deep do we need to go with these conversations in terms of the relationship with the employee? Now, adapting is not just about the person, it's about the environment that the organization is creating. Now, I agree that some people don't have control over many things in the organization. Sometimes they don't have control over the goals they set. They sometimes do, even like in government, you don't have control over the people who come and work under you.
Yes.
And sometimes that is always going to be a problem. Of course, we can't change that from here, and the people who might be in this talk can't change it either. But if you are a leader and you could adapt to each person according to their style, their behaviors, because behaviors come from our childhood and before. So we have to make sure that we could adapt to what you are seeing. Now, there's something called there are many different personality styles or communication style surveys that we could do with people. And a common one is this. There's another one called the Big Five that you could do online, and you could see actually differences in terms of level of agreeableness or conscientiousness, or how much somebody is a driver personality, how many people are analytical personalities who analyze a lot, because a lot of the times that is the difference between that you will take in your approach depending on their styles of communication. You don't always have to do a questionnaire to know what the difference is. You could know it just by understanding where they are, because right now you could tell who are the analytical people, who are the people who are taking long time to make decisions, and what is causing that. Who are the people who are very expressive, that have to let you know everything that's going on in their lives?
That's me, Tony.
Who are the drivers? Who are the people who want to get it done and don't have time for old talk?
Yeah.
Those are the things we have to adapt to. And who are the amiable people? The people who are only relationship focused and want to, don't want to sing Kumbaya in the office, but that is what I mean. They all focus on relationships, and they're afraid to, and they lack assertiveness a lot of the time. So we have to develop that as well, because that sort of, once we are adapting to the different types of personalities and how they are approaching the different types of work environments, then we are able to make better decisions in how we, for anybody who wants to do the Big Five personality style, you can do it free online, and you could actually see, and let me just explain my results. So out of the Big Five, I am very high on conscientiousness and agreeableness. And the reason why my level of agreeableness is so high is because I'm an amiable personality. So I don't jump into conflict. I don't jump into conflict very often. I would closer to avoid it. But I have to be more, I had to learn to be more assertive over the years. So rather than be in an environment where, for example, I used to be in board meetings, and because I'm amiable, I might not say anything. But when my amiable nature, when I get upset, I turn into somebody that is expressive. Mm-hmm. And I tell you something when I get upset. But I had to learn to tell you something while I was at an amiable level. Now, a leader helped me through this, so I understand
A
what I'm
coach.
telling you. So I had to learn rather than saying, "Well, Shivani, I don't agree with you. I don't agree. I'm already upset and telling you what I have to tell you." But I had to learn to say it while I was calm, which means, and it may sound like this, Shivani, I do agree with what you're saying, but I'll tell you why. But I used to hold it and build, and the anger built and built and built until it gets so high that I explode. And that is one thing that we have to avoid. And leaders can help us through this if we know and we have conversations with who are on our team. That is important to understand.
So I'm thinking as you're talking, what am I? I'm definitely very expressive. I would want, if I'm coming, I want to say what it is. I want to tell you what it is one time. Yeah. So
right.
I may have to be I'm the opposite then of you, Tony. I may need my coach now to say, Shivani, you got to calm down a little bit.
Yes, and I could give you feedback on that. But there are some leaders who are afraid to give negative feedback as well.
Yes.
And that is where they might need themselves to develop their level of assertiveness. So that they could give people the negative feedback and tell them what they have to tell them. That is always important. That's always important that we are able to adapt and we have the courage and the initiative to do that.
So Tony, as we wrap up this conversation, right? Tell us it's defined. I'm trying to get the key takeaways here. It's defined. What do you have to do? You define the behaviors.
Yeah, define the behaviors, have the conversations, and adapt to the people.
So define the behaviors, have the conversation with people, and definitely adapt.
So it's really to define, communicate, and adapt.
Define, communicate, and adapt.
Yes.
I'm listening so attentively because I want to go now and actually write down some behaviors and try to ideate and come about with what is really necessary. But of course, you will have to teach us a lot more, and we will hear a lot about it in our upcoming workshops with Tony on Caribbean Connect in October, where we really dive more. So we'll put it on the chat for those of us who haven't seen it as yet. We'll type it in the chat times when it's going to be. And this is where we're going to ideate a lot more, right, Tony, in the upcoming workshops. It's going to be a very interactive.
It's going to be more how to do this and how to do that. So if you want a 3-step process, is to define support. Support is having conversations. If you wanted to say it so that it sounds better, define, support, and adapt.
Define it, support it, and adapt. Define, support, and adapt.
Right.
Understanding behaviors.
Supporting the people with the behaviors and then adapting to them.
Great, Tony. So definitely we spoke about one behavior already, which is initiative, and there are so many different behaviors, but it got to be outlined. And what Vishal was asking in the talk here, how do we actually get people to take initiative, which is one of the behaviors? It got to be defined, right? It got to be defined. People have to know what it is. And, when you spoke about adapting, how do we adapt? And adapting means that we could probably get people to take the initiative too. Huh? How do you adapt?
Well, as long everything is connected. So as long as you have defined the actual behavior that you want, and you have communicated those behaviors to people, if you are spending the time to develop the relationships, if that is one way, of course, you could use that evolutionary way, or you have to disrupt. You let people know this is the behavior we want here. And then you put systems in place, which is the third one, put systems in place, which is the adapting. You adapt not only from a personal level, but the organizational level as well. You have to have processes in place. Why do we have traffic lights on the road? I mean, those are processes that we have in place to make sure people behave. We can't assume that we are adults, we know how to behave. Remember, those behaviors started from in the womb. It's not easy. You just have to find, if you're just starting out a company and you have to hire people, define the behaviors that you want and hire them. Hire the people who have the behaviors already. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time, but at least have that system in place so you could minimize the amount of conflict that you end up with in the end.
Make it easier for yourself, as you said, but not all the time in organizations. A lot of us here in the organizations, part of this chat here, we're not hiring the people. Or they have already, we are the managers now who manage in the team.
Yes.
And we need to know how to work it, is what you were saying, how to work it.
Yes, exactly.
So define the behaviors, define it, support it, and adapt it. Thank you, Tony. I've learned so much in this little short conversation, Tony.
Yes.
And defining behaviors. We spoke about one, which is my favorite one, and your favorite, which is initiative, right? And we're going to talk a lot more in the upcoming workshop we said in October. And we have the link right here where persons can get more information. I look forward to it. It's a very interactive workshop, and we're going to definitely get loads and loads of more information to take us forward right here.
Yes.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, audience. On behalf of Caribbean Connect, I would like to say thank you to everyone, and must mention Project Coordinator Karuna Chandradev and Marketing Consultant Renata Sankar for setting this thing up and bringing Tony forward to our platform, and of course, you, the audience. Tony, any final words before we wrap up?
Well, I mean, it's just to pay attention to the behaviors and make sure that you could at least put something in place so that you could get it right. Make small adjustments at a time. Don't try to change everything all at once. I mean, make small changes. If you have to make small changes with yourself only in terms of what you have to develop about yourself, that is one step closer to creating the right environment so that people could dictate their behaviors. I mean, we do it all the time in our household with our children. We create an environment to dictate certain behaviors.
Tony, how do you know that? This is my favorite word here. You know, think big, start small.
Yes.
Right? Think big, start small, right? So that's my mantra, right? Think big, I know it, and just change one thing. You don't have to do everything, but I think it's big.
Yes. All right.
Thank you very much, Tony. All the best, everybody. See you all back here right in October. Thanks again. Until we meet again, everybody.